At the grand opening of the very hotel where he once slept with his secretary, Ethan raised his voice, then his hand, and spat on his wife in front of everyone, calling her a failure who would never amount to anything. The crowd gasped, but she didn't flinch. She only stared at him with that quiet, haunting calm, the kind that hides storms. He didn't know the woman he just humiliated owned every brick of the hotel he was standing in, nor that the name engraved on the golden plaque outside belonged to her. But why was she silent when she could destroy him with a word? Why did she let him believe she was still powerless? And what did she plan to do that would soon leave him in tears? The sound of champagne glasses clinking had frozen midair. The guests, businessmen, investors, and city officials watched as Ethan wiped his mouth with a napkin, acting as if spitting on his wife was merely an act of authority. "You embarrass me everywhere we go, Elena," he barked. "You should have stayed home." Elena Monroe sat still in her wheelchair, her face composed, lips curved just barely enough to pass as a polite smile. Inside, something fragile had cracked, but not in despair. It was the sound of a quiet decision being made. The chandelier above caught the silver in her eyes. To anyone who looked close enough, they might have seen the reflection of a storm forming behind her calm. Ethan turned to the crowd, forcing a chuckle. "You'll have to excuse my wife," he said, putting a hand on Vanessa's waist, who stood beside him in a red silk dress that shimmered under the ballroom lights. "She gets emotional sometimes." Laughter rippled through the room, uneasy, artificial, but loud enough to sting. Vanessa leaned into Ethan, whispering something that made him smirk. Elena watched them with a steady gaze, her hand resting lightly on the arm of her chair. She didn't blink. She didn't cry. She only whispered to herself, "You'll both learn what emotion truly feels like." The hotel launch was a spectacle, crystal lights, flowing champagne, and media cameras flashing every second. The massive banner read, "Carter Grand Hotel, a new legacy begins." Ethan had insisted his last name be in gold letters, proudly taking credit for the business he claimed he helped fund. What he didn't know was that every cent of the property, every chandelier, every contract, and every grain of sand on the beach outside had been paid for through Monroe Enterprises. Elena's private company, one she'd kept anonymous under a web of trust holdings and shell partnerships. She watched Ethan pose for photographs beside Vanessa, who pressed close enough for the cameras to catch their chemistry. His parents, Robert and Linda, stood at the side beaming with pride, as if their son had single-handedly built the empire himself. Chris Hall, Elena's oldest friend and silent business partner, moved through the crowd quietly, his eyes never leaving her. He had seen this before: Ethan's arrogance, the humiliations, the way Elena swallowed her pain to maintain peace. He approached her and spoke softly. "Elena," he said, bending slightly to her level. "You sure you want to stay here tonight?" Her eyes remained on Ethan. "I want him to finish his speech," she said evenly, "and I want the cameras rolling when he does." Chris studied her expression. There was no bitterness, no visible rage, only control. It unnerved him. "You're not thinking about—" "I'm thinking," she cut in, "that people who mistake silence for weakness are often the first to drown when the tide turns." He nodded slowly. He'd known her long enough to recognize that tone. Years ago, that same tone had come when she decided to build Monroe Enterprises from scratch, right after Ethan had mocked her business ideas as girlish fantasies. Ethan's speech began moments later. Standing on stage, he thanked his partners, his team, and of course, his beloved wife, who stayed home while I made our dreams come true. Laughter again. His mother clapped. Vanessa smiled at the cameras. Elena's smile didn't fade. She stared up at the massive golden hotel sign, gleaming above Ethan's head, and whispered under her breath. Dreams built on lies collapsed the loudest. As the applause roared, her mind drifted back to the first time Ethan had said, "I love you." It had been a winter evening in Chicago, years ago, when she still believed in his warmth. He'd brought her coffee, wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and promised, "I'll build an empire with you." She'd believed him so much that she'd placed him as co-manager in her first company when Monroe Enterprises was still just an idea scribbled on napkins. He'd used her trust like a ladder, climbing higher with every lie. Her chest tightened as the applause died down. Ethan stepped off stage and walked straight to Vanessa, brushing his hand across her back in a gesture so intimate it silenced the whispers in the room. The photographers snapped relentlessly, catching every angle. Elena sat alone, still smiling, when Ethan turned to her with a mocking grin and said, "See, honey? You married a winner." Something inside her clicked. She looked at him with a gaze that could freeze rivers. "You're right," she said softly. "I did marry a winner. But tell me something. Ethan, how does it feel to be standing in a kingdom you don't own?" He frowned, confused, brushing off her words with a scoff. "You'll always be good with metaphors, Elena. Maybe you should have been a writer instead of playing business." She didn't respond. She just let her eyes drift once more to the golden plaque at the lobby entrance, her name, E. Monroe Holdings, subtly engraved in microscopic print at the corner, unnoticed by everyone in the room. Chris watched her wheel away quietly. Something told him tonight had changed everything. Not because she'd been humiliated, but because she had finally decided she'd had enough. Outside, the night air carried the sound of ocean waves crashing against the pier. Elena stopped by the glass doors, looking at her reflection, fragile, soft, forgotten. Then she smiled again, the same haunting calm that began this night. Let them laugh tonight, she thought, because tomorrow they'll beg to remember how it felt to breathe. The night after the hotel launch, the city of Miami slept under silver rain, but Elena Monroe sat awake in her glass-walled penthouse, watching lightning scatter across the ocean. The echoes of Ethan's laughter still pulsed in her memory, blending with Vanessa's voice, soft and mocking. "You should have stayed home, Elena." Her hands trembled, not with pain but with control. She had learned long ago that tears never solved anything. They only fed men like Ethan. She wheeled herself closer to the window, her reflection merging with the storm beyond. "I built this," she whispered. "All of it. And now, I'll take it all back." Chris Hall's message blinked on her phone. "You sure you're ready for this, Lena?" Her lips curved faintly. "I was ready the night he left me for her." The memory came back like smoke, thick, bitter, unforgettable. It was 3 years earlier, before the accident. Elena had been radiant then, her energy sharp and alive. She and Ethan had just celebrated 5 years of marriage. He was charming, ambitious, full of promises, and she believed in every single one. They'd spent nights drafting plans for hotels, resorts, and brand expansions. She handled the numbers, he handled the talk. Together, they seemed unstoppable. Until Vanessa arrived, she joined as Ethan's new assistant at Carter and Monroe Realty. Young, sleek, confident, with that predatory smile that pretended to admire Elena while secretly sizing her up. Ethan had introduced her casually at dinner one night. "Vanessa's a fast learner," he'd said. "She could teach you a thing or two about drive." Elena had laughed it off then. But months later, when Ethan started coming home late and smelling of strange perfume, when he began calling her too soft, too emotional, she knew something had shifted. The night of the car accident sealed everything. She had been on her way to meet Ethan after discovering one of his business dinners was actually at a beachfront suite booked under Vanessa's name. But fate had other plans. A drunk driver had swerved into her lane. Her car spun twice before the world went black. When she woke up weeks later, her body was still, her legs gone silent. Ethan sat beside her, holding his phone instead of her hand. His first words weren't, "I'm glad you're alive." They were, "The investors are pulling out. You ruined the deal." That was the day Elena learned how thin love could be when measured against ambition. She didn't cry. Not even when he stopped visiting, or when the divorce papers came with a note that read, "You'll survive. You always do." Instead, she asked Chris for help. Chris Hall had been her college friend, the kind who saw her before the money, before the titles. A quiet strategist with a brain wired for business and a heart that couldn't stand injustice. When he came to see her in the hospital, she looked at him with eyes that had seen the end and whispered, "I want to start over. But this time, under a name no one knows." That's how Monroe Enterprises was born, an empire forged in shadows. For 2 years, she worked from her hospital bed, rebuilding herself piece by piece. Chris handled the outer world while she handled the vision. They bought failing hotels quietly through dummy corporations, merged them under Monroe Enterprises, and grew faster than anyone suspected. Ethan had been too busy chasing his own public image to realize his wife's company was slowly swallowing the market he depended on. The irony was poetic. The very contractors he boasted about hiring were on her payroll. Every loan Vanessa bragged about securing had been approved by Monroe's financial arm. Elena's silent signature buried in fine print. Now, sitting in her penthouse, she opened her laptop. A spreadsheet of Carter Grand Hotel filled the screen, its ownership trail leading straight back to Monroe Enterprises. Her fingers hovered above the keys. One command, just one, could dismantle Ethan's new empire overnight. But she paused. Revenge without timing was waste. She wanted him to feel it, to see it crumble in his hands while he thought he was winning. The storm outside deepened. Thunder rolled over the sea. Chris arrived an hour later, drenched, his coat dripping onto the marble floor. "You're still awake," he said, shutting the door behind him. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. "I keep hearing his voice in that ballroom." Chris poured 2 glasses of scotch, handing one to her. "Then maybe it's time you stop hearing and start acting." Elena took the glass, her eyes on the flickering city below. "You know what hurts, Chris? It's not that he cheated, it's that he thought I'd stay broken forever, that I'd sit quietly while he paraded her in front of everyone." Chris set his drink down. "You're not broken, Lena. You're rebuilding." She smiled faintly. "Then let's rebuild his destruction too." He studied her face for a long moment. "What's the plan?" Her voice turned cold, measured, deliberate. "In 2 weeks, the Carters are hosting a press gala to celebrate the hotel's success. Ethan's expecting a new wave of investors, but the contracts he'll be signing are already under Monroe's control." Chris raised a brow. "You've already set it up? Every clause, every signature." She tapped her laptop. "Once he signs, he'll unknowingly transfer full operational rights to Monroe Enterprises. He'll lose the hotel and won't even realize it until the press release hits the morning after." Chris exhaled slowly. "And Vanessa?" Elena's smile sharpened. "She'll go down with him. Her accounts, her investments, they're all tied to his. When the hotel collapses, her wealth goes with it. The same greed that brought them together will tear them apart." She turned her gaze to the rain outside again. "Let them sleep soundly tonight. It'll make their morning collapse all the more satisfying." For a moment, silence filled the room, only the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of thunder in the distance. Then Chris said quietly, "You could ruin him in a minute, Elena. But what you're doing, this is poetry." Elena's eyes softened. "No, this is justice." She wheeled back from the desk and closed the laptop with a click that echoed through the glass-walled room. Outside, the lightning flared once more, catching her reflection, the calm, composed woman who had lost everything but gained something greater. Purpose. She whispered to herself. "Tomorrow, I stop being the woman he left behind. Tomorrow, I become the storm he never saw coming." The Carter Grand Hotel glowed like gold against the Miami skyline. From the outside, it looked perfect: marble floors, ocean view suites, and guests who paid more for a night than some people earned in a month. But inside, the air was different now. Restless, nervous. Ethan Carter stood at the balcony of his corner suite, watching the city lights flicker across the horizon. The gala was just a week away, the biggest event of his career. He could already see the headlines. "Ethan Carter expands his empire." Vanessa Reed, dressed in silk, approached from behind and wrapped her arms around him. "You should relax," she murmured. "You've already won." Ethan smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't win until the contracts are signed. The investors want assurance, and I intend to give it to them." Vanessa smirked. "With my charm, not just your confidence." He turned, running a hand through her hair. "You've been useful, Vanessa, but remember who made you." Her expression stiffened, though she hid it with a laugh. "Don't worry, Ethan. I know exactly who I'm tied to." But as she walked away, her smile faltered. She'd been noticing the shifts lately, the accounts that weren't updating properly, the unexpected freezes on certain transactions. When she'd asked Ethan about it, he brushed her off. But something about his sudden unease told her he didn't have as much control as he claimed. Meanwhile, Elena Monroe watched the hotel's financial systems from her office downtown. Every contract, every asset, every number, they all now pulsed under Monroe Enterprises' control. Chris stood beside her, reading the digital feed in disbelief. "He's transferring more than expected," he said. "He's practically signing over his empire." Elena's tone was calm, clinical. That's the arrogance of men who never read fine print. On her screen, Ethan's signature appeared digital, confident, unaware. One click, and everything he owned now legally belonged to her. Stage 1, she said softly. Complete. Chris leaned back, exhaling. You're really going to let him walk into that gala without knowing? Oh, he'll find out, she said, her voice laced with quiet fire. Just not tonight. I want him to toast to his downfall first. Across town, Ethan sat in his office late into the night. The rain outside reminded him of the night of Elena's accident, how quiet it had been afterward, how he hadn't gone to the hospital until morning. He pushed the thought away. He hated remembering her eyes, those calm, unflinching eyes that made him feel small. Why are you up so late? Vanessa's voice broke his thoughts. She was holding a glass of wine, wearing that same red robe she'd worn the night he first betrayed his wife. Finalizing the deal, he said. After the gala, we'll be unstoppable. She leaned against the doorway. You know, sometimes I think about her. He looked up sharply. Who? Elena. The woman you left. Don't you ever wonder what she's doing now? Ethan's jaw tightened. She's gone, Vanessa. Probably living off what's left of my charity. Vanessa tilted her head, studying him. You talk about her like she still haunts you. He turned away. I don't talk about ghosts. She smiled faintly but didn't press. Still, when she lay beside him later that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake a strange unease. It wasn't love, she'd never truly loved Ethan, but fear. The kind that came when the ground beneath you starts to tremble, and you realize too late that it's not an earthquake, it's judgment. 3 days before the gala, Ethan's phone rang during breakfast. It was his father. Son, we have a problem, Robert Carter said. The investors from New York pulled out. They're saying the contract shifted ownership to another firm, something called Monroe Enterprises. You know anything about that? Ethan froze. That's impossible. The documents were drafted under Carter Grand. Then explain this. Robert's voice grew harsh. They just called me, said Monroe Enterprises is now the primary shareholder. You'd better fix this before the press finds out. Ethan ended the call without replying. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. He opened his laptop, scanning through the documents, and his stomach dropped. The fine print glowed back at him, unmistakable. Monroe Enterprises now holds all controlling rights to Carter Grand Hotel. No, he whispered. That's not possible. Vanessa appeared behind him, still in her robe. What's wrong? He stared at her, color draining from his face. Someone just bought us out without lifting a finger. Across town, Elena closed her laptop. The message notification popped up a second later. Ethan Carter just accessed the file. Chris looked over. He knows? Now he does, she said, her voice low but satisfied. Let him feel it sink in. Chris hesitated. Are you sure you don't want to stop here? You've already won, Elena. You've taken everything. Her eyes didn't move from the window. No, Chris, not everything. He still has his pride, and I intend to take that last. That night, Vanessa confronted Ethan in his office. What did you do? She snapped. My accounts, everything's frozen. Did you sign something without reading again? He slammed his fist against the desk. Don't you dare blame me. Someone tricked us both. Someone, she repeated, her voice shaking. You mean her, don't you? He froze. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Oh my God, it is her, isn't it? The crippled little wife you thought couldn't hurt a fly. You humiliated her, Ethan. You spat on her, and now she owns everything we built. Ethan grabbed her arm. Don't call her that. Vanessa wrenched free, glaring. Why? Because you still love her? He didn't answer. He couldn't, because for the first time, he realized it was true. The guilt he'd buried under pride was clawing its way back. Vanessa stormed out, slamming the door. Ethan stood alone, staring at the skyline where the lights of Monroe Tower glowed faintly in the distance. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. He whispered into the silence, Elena, what have you done? The night of the gala arrived like a stage built for judgment. The ballroom of the Carter Grand, once Ethan's crowning jewel, glittered under chandeliers, alive with reporters, investors, and Miami's elite. But beneath the champagne smiles and camera flashes, whispers ran like cracks in glass. Everyone had heard the rumor. Monroe Enterprises now owned the hotel. Ethan Carter stood near the stage, sweat hidden beneath his designer suit. His tie felt too tight, his heart heavier than the applause around him. Vanessa Reed, once radiant in red, stood by his side, her confidence wilted. She'd spent the last 48 hours trying to access her accounts, everyone frozen, every card declined. Smile, Ethan hissed under his breath. We have to keep control of the narrative. Vanessa forced a brittle grin. Control? You lost that the moment she took your empire, Ethan. He glared at her, but she turned away, her eyes scanning the crowd. You didn't just lose the hotel. You lost everything that mattered. The announcer's voice boomed across the room. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our honored guest, Elena Monroe, CEO of Monroe Enterprises. The room fell silent. Ethan's head snapped toward the entrance. Through the tall glass doors, Elena Monroe entered graceful, poised, her wheelchair gliding over the marble floor like a queen's chariot. Every camera turned, every whisper sharpened. Her silver gown shimmered under the lights, and behind her walked Chris Hall, tall, calm, holding a briefcase that might as well have been a sword. Ethan's face drained of color. She came. Vanessa's lips twisted into a whisper. Oh, she didn't just come. She's come to bury you. Elena's calm eyes met Ethan's from across the room. The noise dimmed. In that moment, time folded between them, the years of love, betrayal, silence, and power all collapsing into one glance. She approached the podium slowly. The microphone waited. Cameras flashed like lightning. Good evening, she began, her voice soft but commanding. It's an honor to stand in the hotel that represents both a beginning and an ending. The crowd leaned forward. Ethan swallowed hard, his pulse hammering in his ears. Elena continued, her tone still measured. 3 years ago, I was told I'd never stand again, that I'd never lead, never rebuild, never matter. But strength, she said, pausing to look directly at Ethan, doesn't always walk. Sometimes, it wheels its way through storms. A murmur rippled through the guests. She smiled faintly. For those unaware, Monroe Enterprises has acquired full ownership of Carter Grand Hotel and all related properties. Effective immediately, the Carter name will be removed from this establishment. The crowd gasped. Flashbulbs exploded. Ethan lunged forward. Elena, stop this! You can't! She turned her gaze on him, serene, unflinching. Can't what, Ethan? Take back what was always mine. Her words hung in the air like thunder. You built this image on my name, my investments, my labor. Even your parents drew their salaries from my company. You spat on me at the opening of my hotel, and you called me worthless. But tell me, she leaned forward, voice low but razor sharp, how worthless do I look now? Gasps filled the room. Ethan froze, his lips parting but no sound coming. Robert and Linda Carter exchanged terrified glances from their table. Vanessa covered her mouth, trembling. Elena continued, her eyes never leaving her husband's face. Pride is a beautiful poison, isn't it? You drank it thinking it made you powerful. But power without gratitude is nothing more than a leash around your own neck. Her calm composure only made it more unbearable. Ethan stepped closer, desperation cracking through his arrogance. Elena, please don't do this here. We can talk privately. She shook her head slowly. You had your chance to talk. You chose to humiliate me instead. Vanessa snapped, voice sharp, trembling. He chose me. He left you because you were broken. The crowd gasped again. Elena turned to her, eyes soft but piercing. No, Vanessa. He left me because I made him feel small, and you made him feel big. But now that the mirror's turned, tell me, do you still like what you see beside you? Vanessa's voice faltered. You think you've won? You've only proven you're bitter. Elena smiled gently. Bitter? No, my dear. I'm better. There's a difference. She nodded at Chris, who opened the briefcase and handed her a single folder. She held it up. Inside this document are the final papers. Effective tomorrow morning, the hotel's management team, including Ethan Carter and Vanessa Reed, will be terminated. Their accounts will be audited. Every cent stolen, returned. Ethan's legs buckled slightly. Elena, She cut him off, her voice breaking its calm for the first time, low, trembling but fierce. You left me for dead, Ethan, and I still prayed for you. I watched you build happiness on the ruins of my pain. But when you spat on me, I realized something. Mercy without respect is wasted. So tonight, I give you none. Silence. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, uninvited. Elena, please. I made mistakes. I was wrong. I was proud. But don't take everything. Her gaze softened, not with forgiveness, but understanding. I'm not taking everything, Ethan. I'm leaving you with something money can't buy. The memory of what you lost. Then she turned her chair away. Goodbye, Ethan. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Ethan collapsed into a chair, head in his hands, the sound of applause and whispers blurring around him. Vanessa stormed off the stage, shouting for a car that would never come, her accounts frozen. Her cards declined. Chris followed Elena out into the night air. The city stretched wide before them, the wind cool, the ocean calm. You did it, he said softly. It's over. Elena looked out over the skyline. No, it's just balanced. She lifted her face toward the stars, her voice quiet, resolute. Justice doesn't shout, Chris. It whispers when pride falls. And with that, she wheeled forward into the night. No tears, no anger, just peace. The chandelier light from the ballroom spilled behind her like the setting sun, over a story finally ending the way it should. Not with vengeance, but with dignity reclaimed. 6 months later, the Carter Grand stood under a new name, the Monroe Royale. The same golden chandeliers still hung, but the energy had changed. The hotel no longer whispered betrayal. It breathed rebirth. Elena Monroe watched the sunrise from her penthouse balcony, wrapped in a white silk robe, coffee steaming beside her. Below, guests bustled, bellboys smiled, and the city pulsed with life. For the first time in years, she felt light, not triumphant, just at peace. Chris stepped outside, sleeves rolled up, carrying the morning paper. They ran the story again, he said, setting it beside her. The headline read, Ex-hotel magnate Ethan Carter declared bankrupt, former CEO seeks counseling. Elena's eyes traced the lines but lingered on his photo. A man aged 10 years and 6 months, beard uneven, their eyes hollow. There was no hatred left in her, only distance. Do you regret it? Chris asked quietly. She smiled faintly. No, because it wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Chris nodded. He's trying to start over, teaching business ethics at a community college. That made her chuckle softly. How poetic. The man who mocked integrity now teaches it. She paused, looking toward the horizon. Maybe this was his second chance. Maybe mine too. Chris leaned on the railing beside her. You think he'll ever forgive himself? Elena turned her face toward the breeze. Forgiveness isn't mine to give or his to earn. It's just something time decides. A quiet moment passed. The ocean glittered. Down in the courtyard, the hotel's new. Plaques shimmered in the light, dedicated to resilience and to every woman told she cannot rise again. It wasn't about Ethan anymore. It never truly had been. It was about every wound she'd turned into wisdom. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Carter sat alone in a modest classroom. The chalk squeaked faintly against the board as he wrote, Pride destroys faster than failure. His students, young entrepreneurs, listened closely, unaware they were learning from a man who once lost everything for ego. After class, he sat at his desk, thumbing through a photo of Elena back when they were happy, her laughter mid-bloom, sunlight in her eyes. He closed the frame gently and whispered, I hope you're free now. Vanessa, on the other hand, had disappeared from the headlines. Rumor had it she'd left the country, working as a hotel waitress in Spain, stripped of luxury, facing the very humility she once mocked. Back at the Monroe Royale, the lobby filled with music as the evening pianist began to play. Elena rolled through the marble floor, nodding to the staff. She paused near the same spot Ethan once spat at her, the place where pain had ended and power began. She smiled, whispered to herself, You don't win by breaking others. You win by rebuilding yourself. Outside, the sky melted into gold. The sea breeze carried laughter, clinking glasses, and the quiet hum of renewal. And for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Elena didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like a woman reborn.